Across the world, many feel an exhaustion that sleep cannot touch. It is not just physical fatigue, but a constant mental hum, as if the mind never powers down. Rest offers no relief. Beneath the surface, something deeper is failing. This sense of depletion is not yours alone. The pillars that once gave direction, career, achievement, self-improvement, have lost their weight. Dialogue feels staged, the digital world hollow. Beliefs, relationships, even identity itself begins to loosen, and the question emerges: who am I now? Jungian psychiatrist Edward Edinger named moments like these apocalyptic. He defined the apocalypse as the coming of the self into conscious realization, literally world-shattering. It is not destruction for its own sake, but the collapse of an inner structure that can no longer contain what presses from below. This is why so many feel adrift. It is not a vague collective burnout, but a confrontation with meaning itself. Systems show their fractures, beliefs erode, and many awaken to the fact that they have been surviving rather than living and refuse to continue on the same path. The question remains: what follows such a revelation? Edward Edinger, among the foremost Jungian thinkers in America, was a psychiatrist who worked closely with Jung's ideas and authored more than a dozen books, including Ego and Archetype and Anatomy of the Psyche. His final work, The Archetype of the Apocalypse, appeared shortly after his death, the manuscript approved in his final days. Edinger's legacy was the translation of vast psychological theory into lived experience, making Jung's most abstract insights vivid in moments of personal and collective crisis. In The Archetype of the Apocalypse, Edinger defines the archetype as a pattern, a primordial psychic ordering of images that has a collective or generalized quality. It is not formed by personal experience, but arises from the deeper strata of the psyche Jung called the collective unconscious. For Edinger, the archetype is not static. It is a dynamic agency, a living organism that inhabits the collective psyche, an active force that moves, shapes, and acts upon us. In Edinger's usage, the apocalypse is not the religious end of the world. The term comes from the Greek apokalypsis, uncovering, the removal of a veil. It is not fire and ruin, but the revelation of what has been concealed. In the book of Revelation, it is the unveiling of what lay behind the curtain. Psychologically, it is the moment when the unconscious discloses what the conscious mind could not or would not see. Here, the symbolic dimension is essential. The apocalypse is not merely a prophecy of external collapse, but an event within. It appears in the individual whose identity disintegrates, and in the culture whose guiding narratives fail, whose institutions lose trust, whose shared meaning dissolves. The archetype emerges when the balance is broken, and what was hidden demands to be seen. The process begins, Edinger writes, when it constellates, activates, at the point where the psyche can no longer sustain its existing order. It may unfold through personal trauma, loss, or inner conflict, or on a collective scale in times of cultural crisis. When the structure fails, the deeper strata of the psyche press upward. The surface may show breakdown or chaos, yet psychologically, it is the movement toward transformation, the collapse of the old to make space for the new. This is not abstract. It is visible in the present moment, the widespread questioning of work, belief, relationship, and purpose, the surge in mental distress, anxiety, and burnout. These are not isolated afflictions, but signs of a deeper shift. Through Edinger's lens, they reveal a collective tipping point, an archetypal process unfolding in real time. Here, the symbolic perspective becomes vital. The question shifts from what is collapsing to what is being revealed. This does not deny the pain or disorder, but seeks its meaning. Archetypes do not merely destroy, they give form to change. When the apocalypse archetype is active, the collapse itself becomes the confrontation with what has been denied, avoided, or suppressed, and its emergence into view. For Jung and Edinger, meaning is not invented but discovered in the deeper patterns of the psyche. The apocalypse is the moment those patterns erupt into consciousness. When they do, the ego struggles to retain control, while the self, the deeper ordering force, pursues its own design. This tension destabilizes, yet it is the very force that makes the process necessary. Clarity on Jung's terms is essential to understanding the psychic apocalypse. By ego, he meant not pride, but the conscious point of identification, the I, the daily personality. The self, however, is far greater. The totality of the psyche, known and unknown, including potentials not yet realized. The lowercase self is the ego's image of itself. The capital S self is the deeper whole. When Edinger describes the apocalypse as the coming of the self into conscious realization, he identifies a collision between the limited ego and the deeper self. It is not a gentle meeting, but a takeover. The self does not negotiate. It forces the repressed, the shadow, the unlived life into view. The ego resists, and in that resistance lie the chaos, collapse, and confusion. From this collision arises a particular anxiety, not mere stress, but an existential unrest. Life no longer coheres. Something vast presses in without a name. Jung saw this as the feeling of the self constellating, breaking through the crust of identity. It comes as dread, as pressure, at times as near madness. The ego grasps at old maps and stories, but none fit, for this is not a surface adjustment, but a total reorientation of the psyche. This is not only an individual pattern, but a collective one. The Western ego as a cultural identity is breaking down, overextended, inflated, and out of balance. Progress, rationalism, and control have been driven to extremes, and the systems built upon them, economic, political, psychological, are fracturing. The center fails because it has lost connection to the depths, and the result is crisis in people, institutions, and the environment. It is neither random nor isolated, but the symptom of the collective psyche. For Jung, archetypes compensate for imbalance. When a culture becomes one-sided, overly rational, externalized, and ego-driven, the unconscious responds. The apocalypse archetype erupts not as punishment or prophecy, but as correction. Yet correction is painful where resistance is great, and today that resistance is immense. Identities are bound to systems and stories that can no longer bear their weight. Technology, ideology, and consumerism cannot answer the deeper questions. They distract but do not connect. The mirror matters. What unfolds in the world, in news, climate, and instability, echoes what is felt within. Burnout, breakdown, disconnection, loss of purpose. This is no coincidence. The ancient axiom, as within, so without, holds true. The micro reflects the macro and the reverse. Personal and cultural crises are not separate but intertwined. The psyche speaks symbolically, so when the world fractures, we must ask, what inner pattern is breaking as well? Jung called the self the ordering principle of the psyche. When it remains unconscious, life is divided, held together by willpower and habit. When it becomes active, it draws all toward integration, bringing shadow, ignored parts, and unprocessed pain to the surface. It reorganizes from within, Without asking leave, lives appear to fall apart. Jobs, relationships, identities. But this is not random. It is archetypal. The ego can no longer hold, and something deeper breaks through. For Edinger, the self does not enter consciousness politely. It crashes through. This is not gentle integration, but confrontation, arriving with force because the ego rarely attends until compelled. He called it apocalyptic because it shatters the existing structure. Personally and collectively, the old world begins to break. Without shadow work, without space for the unconscious, the psyche erupts through any available fracture. Then the individual is swept into collective moods, ideologies, and hysteria. What is not met on one's own terms arrives unbidden, most often through collapse. By collapse, Edinger meant not metaphor, but the breakdown of meaning systems, religion, identity, personal myth, and the inherited ideologies on which lives are built. These frameworks may have held once, but when the self advances, they fail. This is evident in the loss of trust in institutions and the rejection of traditional roles, beliefs, and narratives, not from rebellion, but because the inner life no longer fits the old forms. The system of meaning falls away, leaving a vast expanse of not knowing. In this context, apocalypse is not destruction, but revelation, the removal of what is false or incomplete so that something whole may emerge. For Edinger, this new order forms not around the ego, but the self. Breakdown creates space for a center of identity that holds shadow, contradiction, and the unconscious. Such integration does not occur in the spotlight, but in darkness. In the midst of it, it feels like loss. Symbolically, it is initiation. For Jung, initiation was essential to transformation. In myth, religion, and dream, it always follows the same sequence: death before rebirth, descent before return. This, he would say, is what now unfolds on both personal and collective levels. Many are not merely weary, but undergoing psychic initiation. Lacking a name for it, they believe themselves broken, when in truth they are moving toward wholeness. Without language or a map, the experience feels like aimless suffering. Here, Edinger's work matters. It frames the chaos, neither dismissing nor avoiding it, but making it intelligible. Here we pause. In the next part, the symbols of apocalypse will come into focus, drawn from the Book of Revelation, from Ragnarok in Norse myth, from Kali in Hindu cosmology. These images were never meant to terrify, but to guide through transformation. We will also examine how the shadow constellates in collective crises, and what follows when it is projected outward rather than faced within. For now, hold to this. What is unfolding, personally and collectively, is not random. It carries meaning. Painful, yes. Confusing, certainly, but necessary. Something is dismantling so that something truer may be built. It may not be yours to repair or to resolve, but to remain present, honest, and attentive to what seeks emergence. What follows the collapse may be better, founded upon what is real. Until then, the inquiry continues in Mantis Library.